get started, I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Board of Finance for Thursday, May 14th, 5 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for coming today, but also for the folks that are tuning in. So this is a regular meeting, but we're also covering budget topics. It's a little bit abnormal because we're going to add a bit to our agenda today within the budget topic, and here's some additional information. So just to set the stage for this, the Board of Finance objective with this budget as we deal with this COVID-19 pandemic was to see if we could reduce the budget in some regard. And we have painted two targets or two scenarios to try to do that. The first one's what we're calling to achieve a budget that has a flat mill rate, so the same mill rate that we had last year. And the second one is what I would describe as a flat tax levy. So in that case, we would raise the same tax dollars that we raised last year. So what we did is we determined the reductions that were required for each scenario, and we apportioned them to the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen. We've sorted through their responses, and we came to a preliminary conclusion last week for the Board of Selectmen and 2 days ago for the Board of Education that we could manage a total reduction that would actually get us to the flat tax levy budget. So if we vote tonight to recommend this to the RTM and then they approve it, this means that the total taxes collected for the coming year will be no higher than the taxes that we collected last year. But before we get to this, we have two more discussions. At their meeting after the Board of Finance on Tuesday of this week, the Board of Education requested a budget workshop to engage in further dialogue. We've had quite a few opportunities to date to understand the Board of Education budget. We attended the superintendent's overview and detailed discussions in early January. We saw public hearings on their budget in late January and early February. The Board of Finance received the Board of Education budgets formally on March 3rd, which included a presentation by the Board of Education as well as Q&A from Board of Finance members. And the Board of Finance itself had a statutory meeting on March 10th to hear from the public on all budgets. So we've had lots of opportunities to review and discuss and debate this budget, but in the Board of Education's defense, we have not had joint public discussions since the crisis began. And it's clear that there's disagreement about the cuts that the Board of Finance identified on Tuesday. So in light of all this, I'm happy to have this discussion tonight. Out of fairness, I've also invited the Board of Selectmen, as they have not had a similar opportunity to engage us again since this crisis began. We're going to start with the Board of Education. I would invite Ms. Achman and Dr. Adley, who are actually here in Town Hall with me, room 206, to engage us however they would like. We're going to follow this with the Board of Selectmen, and then the Board of Finance will meet separately for the remainder of its meeting. The public has access to this live feed on Channel 79, and the webcast link will be published shortly after the conclusion of this meeting. So before I hand it over to Ms. Achman and Dr. Adley, I'd like to offer the following just to set the table. First thing is I'd like to thank the Board of Selectmen. I know they engaged all department heads in responding to the reduction targets we laid out. In the end, they came through with reductions that exceeded even the larger flat tax scenario. I'd like to acknowledge them for that and to commend Ms. Stevenson in particular. Thank you. The Board of Education has also worked hard on this. At the Board of Finance meeting 2 days ago, we reviewed the administration's memo outlining their response to our request. We tentatively adopted the following reductions, which we'll vote on tonight. Before we get into this, could I ask everyone to mute their telephone, please? Everybody who's on, just mute your phone. Thanks. Okay, so we came to the following reductions, which I'd just like to outline briefly. The first one was $223,750 in capital expenditures. These were mostly small items that we felt could be reasonably deferred a year. They include replacing carpet in the high school and Middlesex libraries, replacing some pavement and curbs in a few places, and replacing one old truck that the administration felt could last another year. We did not cut important things like planned security cameras, lockdown protections, fire alarm panel replacement, or replacement of another truck that was clearly beyond its useful life. We took the advice of the administration, and we did not cut anything critical or anything that would materially impact the education of students. The second area where we have a cut is $461,101 in operating expenses. We have no control over these expenses, but the administration had identified a variety of reductions which were mostly the result of accounting changes, renegotiated contracts, and postponed software and other updates and maintenance. We agree with these recommendations and included the amount in our cut, and again, none of them appear materially to impact the education of students. One final cut that we identified on Tuesday that we would vote on today is a $557,500 general cut to the operating budget for the Board of Education. We picked this number because it actually goes the last bit to help us meet the objective of having a flat tax levy budget, so flat tax dollars versus last year. So it is true that we looked at some specific operating expenses while we were doing this, the list of which has been widely circulated. The reason was to confirm in our minds that this additional cut could be made without materially impacting the education of students. But the driver of our decision was much larger and based on a full review of the Board of Education budget, as well as our own experience with these budgets, certainly in my case, over the last 12 years. So I don't think it will be productive to get into a discussion about these line items. We did not rely on them in making our decision, and we're not asking that they be cut. But having done our work, we think a reasonable person can comfortably conclude that this $557,500 cut does not need to materially damage Darien schools. More broadly, though, I would invite the board to consider the context of what we've asked. The overall budget, after the cuts you yourselves were okay with, totals $104,385,184. From this, we have asked for an additional cut of $557,500. This may seem like a lot, but it is not a 10% cut. It is not a 1% cut. It is a cut of 1/2 of 1% beyond the items that you identified. In my opinion, there's no government budget, no corporate budget, no family budget, no school budget, no budget anywhere that cannot handle a 0.5% reduction without damaging fundamental core responsibilities. Our sense is that there are plenty of expense items that could be reduced and not require resorting to more drastic changes. I have enormous respect for Dr. Adley. Personally and professionally, I've not known him long, but I count him as a friend. To be frank, I voted for these additional reductions reluctantly because I take him at his word that this is an already tight budget. But these are unprecedented times, and I think they demand taking a fresh look and maybe a harder look at next year's spending plans. I would ask my friend Dr. Adley to do just this. In closing, I'll reiterate a point I've made several times. If after this fresh look, Dr. Adley is firmly convinced that he cannot make changes without materially affecting the student experience, I will quickly convene a Board of Finance meeting and invite him to make his case for an additional appropriation. As difficult as these cuts are, I hope, Dr. Adley, that you will take away from this our full commitment to back you up if you have real expenses you cannot meet, whether it's because of this cut or because of other factors like COVID-19 preparations and planning. We are here when you need us, but in the meantime, please take a close look to see if you can accommodate this small cut. We owe at least this much to our taxpayers. I am confident that you can, but I'm always willing to be proven wrong. With this, I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Achman and Dr. Adley. For any comments that you might have, we are here to listen.
So thank you, Chairman Zagrodzky, for granting this work session. I think we have found them valuable in the past, and I appreciate you doing it. I understand timing was short in order to get it done. So just as a bit of recap, similarly and respectfully, I think the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education engaged all of their departments to come up with guidance, with solutions.
No one can hear Sarah.
No one can hear Tara.
There's a, I'm going to move on close. Thanks.
So they've got a microphone, but these
better?
guys are actually dialed in, so they cannot hear on this speakerphone. Let me see. I can turn this around. I'm not sure if that's going to work.
Is this any better if I speak very loudly and I'll move?
The other alternative is you can come sit here.
Why don't I come up here?
And then, or actually right there.
Feet apart.
If you just sit right there, that'd be fine.
Because then I'll turn it over and maybe Alan can come sit here.
Can you guys hear now?
Is
Okay.
this better, guys?
Hello?
Yes, that's much better.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
And we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you for the Board of Finance for granting us this meeting. I think our work sessions have proved valuable in the past, and hopefully that is the case again this evening. I think the Board of Education certainly engaged all of its department with the challenge put before it by the Board of Finance, in the challenges being first to look at what would happen and could we get to something that would create for the town of Darien a no change to the mill rate, and the other being the flat levy. So the Board of Education, through its administration, put forward one that met the first part of the challenge, and we did note, based on our recommendations from the administration, that the flat levy would create changes to students, staffing, and programs. I think what we are looking to do this evening is to bridge an impasse, which is even maybe just clarification. We heard from the Board of Finance at their last meeting that there was no desire to materially affect education. We believe that. We also heard that they thought that their reductions to our budget wouldn't do that. We met directly after your meeting, and our administration told us that these cuts would materially affect education. And so while we are respectful of the Board of Finance's right to decide taxation for Darien, we just think all information should be put on the table so that when those decisions are made, they are at the very least made fully informed. And then we respect the process going forward. I would say we do look at our budget, and I'm sure Dr. Adley and Rich Rudel will get into it, as fixed in many ways, so that the operating cuts you make are actually to a very small percent of the budget. I think the best way to go about this, though, in terms of time and being most efficient, is to turn it over to Dr. Adley, and Rich Rudel is here to help kind of explain their position, and or if there's any questions from the Board of Finance. So like I said, the goal being that all information is on the table so that when these decisions are made, everyone feels like they have a full set of information. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Adley.
I don't think I can.
Yeah, I'll switch with them.
Yeah, you probably should. So you don't have to walk up and down. Can I come to that one?
You sit down. Yeah, park right there.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Late afternoon or early evening. I want to thank Mr. Chairman for the opportunity to come before the Board of Finance this evening. Also want to recognize the work of the Board of Finance. It's not an easy job, and you have a significant challenge before you. And I also want to recognize our taxpayers in town, our community members. We're particularly sensitive to their needs. I would also like to appreciate the Board of Finance's support as the new superintendent in town. That has been appreciated as we've moved through a very difficult process this year. So I'd just like to sort of share a couple of wee perspectives. As we move through this particular process, I would say, in all honesty, we made a significant effort to look at this conundrum and dilemma seriously and creatively as best as we could, which included looking at line items and revisiting issues through the budget that have changed since the budget was done, and just to look at areas and opportunities that existed, and we did that. I recognise that we made a suggestion for a non-lapsing account, and certainly I respect the Board of Finance decision on that, but that is an opportunity that could have availed itself. It is used in a number of districts. There are at least two, I think it's East Haven and Plymouth, that actually have 2% in their actually non-lapsing account. We felt that was a way that mutually together that we could meet the needs and the desire of the Board of Finance's charge, which was, and I very much appreciate the Board of Finance's charge, which was don't disrupt the education of the kids significantly, either through programs, staffing, or otherwise. But I did signal to the Board of Education in the past two meetings that should we experience further cuts and reductions, that we actually would be impacting education. And I've tried hard It's not my practice to inflame people unnecessarily so, or get them concerned unnecessarily. Hence, through those 2 meetings, we didn't actually discuss the items, but it was very clear that any additional reduction would actually impact the educational program. Hence, at the most recent Board of Education meeting, I had to share, it was time to share some of those excellent experiences and what they would be. I know you don't want, Mr. Chairman, you've mentioned not to go through the list, which is certainly your prerogative, but as I go through the list, I see these as being material. Now, that's not to say that the board has the opportunity certainly to look at it, superintendent's and administration's recommendation and revisit issues. There's issues from taking risk factors to revisiting issues that were priorities and maybe aren't priorities anymore. But given the direction that I felt that what was important to the board, what's important to the community, hence I put forward some recommendations. And the board hasn't actually looked at those in tremendous detail, and will continue to do that. And certainly I know the board would look at all particular areas, but we just respectfully have a difference as to what is the material impact on the educational program of students. I came here not to engage in reductions. Hope I wasn't, but life has changed across the country, and I understand that, and in Connecticut. But I'm delighted to be here. But I would also say that along with Richard, we bring in expertise and experience in the educational field, and I don't make these recommendations lightly. And if the board doesn't want to go through those tonight, that I can understand that, but we can certainly talk to him should you wish to do that. I just thought honestly that I'm particularly sensitive to the taxpayers, right? But I just felt that there was a mutual way to get there, and that I think it could have been accomplished and might still be accomplished if it was to be looked at a wee bit differently. And that's just an honest appraisal.
I think that's fair. I think and this will add in a bit to the non-lapsing account point, which is I'd kind of separate this into 2 pieces. Okay, I think the first is the challenge, and the second is the commitment. So the challenge to you is to simply ask the question, can you try to do with this amount less in your budget, right? As I said before, we're talking about 0.5% in terms of magnitude. It's not something that's 1 or 10 or some dramatic cut like that. It really is just a 0.5% cut. When you think about it, it's like you had $104 in your pocket, right? And we're talking about a cut of 57 cents. Okay, we're not talking about $10, $50, 57 cents. And so the top-down challenge to you is to say, we hear what you're saying, and we recognize you guys are professionals and have been through all of these numbers pretty carefully. But I would say that this budget really was designed in a time where we had no anticipation of this, right? There was no inkling or sense that we were about to be in a world of a pandemic where we would have 8% unemployment, maybe more, in the town of Darien, where we would have 700 people filing for unemployment in the town of Darien. None of that was anticipated at the time this budget was developed. In fact, this budget was developed at a time where we're moving pretty aggressively forward as a town in terms of our education mission and trying to educate our students as best as possible. And so our request comes to you because times have changed and no other reason, right? We've had a lot of interaction with town businesses, with taxpayers and others. It's true they're not as vocal or as well organized as the CDSP or others who've written and launched email campaigns in favor of the Board of Education budget, but those individuals are out there and that pain is real. And I think we owe it to them to demonstrate that there's been a methodical post-pandemic effort to take a look at what you're doing and really be able to answer that question honestly and forthrightly to those taxpayers. This is, we did take a careful look at this, and we can look you in the eye and say a 0.5% reduction, even on a budget that was developed well before this pandemic took place, a 0.5% reduction simply cannot, under any circumstances, be achieved without materially impacting students in this town. And I regret the hullabaloo that's blown up over this list of expenses that came out. But what we were trying to do with that is say, can a reasonable person look at that or look anywhere in what is essentially a 3-inch binder, right? This jackman came out 3 inches, but double spaced. We're sort of saving paper. I kind of like that, actually. That in this huge Board of Education budget of $104 million, that there is simply no opportunity, not just to reduce things, but maybe approach things a little bit differently. Is there some different thing that can be done that might be able to create the savings to do this? So that's the challenge. And I think all we're asking here is that we would set a budget that would put this cut in place, and we would pitch this challenge to you that says for the next 30, 60 days, could you please take that fresh look? And then get back to us after that and say, yes, we did find a few things, or no, in all honesty, these are the list of things that we did. It does not work. I will be the first person to convene a Board of Finance meeting, which gets to my second point, and that is the commitment point, right? If you cannot do this, right, there is $23 million in fund balance in this account, $5 million in excess of what we have set as our floor, that we can bring to bear to solve these problems. But despite the fact that those funds exist today, I think we owe it to taxpayers to say that an honest effort over a period of time, not in a quick reaction to a Board of Finance meeting 2 hours before, right, that a careful effort was taken over a discrete period to answer that question completely to the confidence of those taxpayers. If you cannot do that, this board will convene and we will submit an appropriation request to the RTM and solve that problem. We are not leaving students in a lurch. We're not going to permit the destruction of education in this town. We're not canceling a 3rd grade strings program. I want to be clear about that. We're not going to do any of that. But I think it's fair to ask you to please take one more look at this budget.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Chairman, and I know the board will take another look at the budget very carefully. I just want to also just mention that the budget that was brought in at 3.46, I think you recognise, and I appreciated people's support on the challenges that we dealt with there. If I had a word for this list, I'll get off the list a little bit, but if during the development of the 3.46, we reduced nearly 9 staff members, particularly 9 staff members. I would have reduced these first. And the actual thought process behind what's in the list, in addition to sort of being expedited by the Board of Finance's request, it was a work in progress the whole way along because we had a very difficult budget process to actually go through in the first place. So our list was extensive, but we went back again and gave a good faith effort on the on any other reductions that we can actually materialize. So I appreciate your comments that you don't want to materially impact education, and that is very much. But that's in all honesty, that's in the eye of the beholder.
Well, and that's right, and that's why I think really I want you to interpret our ask as going through and taking another fresh look. Right? I don't doubt, and I was very clear about that in my opening comments, I don't doubt that you attempted to deliver a budget that met that standard, even before this pandemic, right? I have confidence that you would show up with a budget that had a lot of excess in there, just as the professional person you are, and you are as well, Rich. At the same time, I just think having a specific effort, again, over the next, call it 30 days, where you take just another careful look at this. And again, if you find that, look, it's just simply impossible to do, right? Let's have a discussion about it. Let's pull out fund balance. Let's solve that problem. But no parent should take away from this meeting that we're looking to damage schools, right? What every parent and every taxpayer should take from this meeting is that we're simply asking for a fresh look to be taken at this budget. That's it. I don't think a fresh look should be cursory by any means, nor should it take a few days. It's going to take a few weeks, maybe a month to sort through that. But to get back to us and let us know what your reaction is.
So, Mr. Zagrodzky, could you
Yes.
just clarify for me the 30 days? Because my understanding is statutorily you will vote on this tonight and then the budget goes to the RTM.
Yeah, so I'm saying that if you require additional funding, that you're able to show that you can't get this done, we'd actually convene an appropriation to take the funding out of fund balance to make up the budget shortfall.
So,
Right,
the
so
total
here's
appropriation for the Board
Well,
of, would it be inclusive of the total appropriation by the Board of Education going to the RTM?
Right, so what we would talk about tonight, if we voted on the cuts that were described, so the $557,500, let's say that vote passes tonight, that budget would go to the RTM, assuming they make no further reductions. That then becomes the budget for the Board of Education.
Correct.
So what'll happen is you have to deal with that $557,000 cut. What we're asking is that Board of Education, in conjunction with the administration, takes a long, careful look at that. If sometime in July you finish that, maybe it takes 30 days for you to do that review, maybe longer, into August. Maybe new information comes up as part of that in terms of your COVID-19 preparations. The state of Connecticut clarifies all that, and your requirements for an appropriation are completely different, maybe much bigger, depending on what the outcome of those discussions and requirements are. We will convene a meeting to entertain an appropriation request to cover all that. And from that meeting, we have fund balance and plenty of resources to deal with that particular request. But what we would like to do is start with this cut, ask you to take that fresh look. If it turns out that the appropriate budget is simply not enough to cover all of this, we would be happy to convene a meeting and get an appropriation in your favor. The other
So I
thing
think
that
we'd have to look just what that would do for MBR for us and NC, but I do think, and I want to make sure I have my dates right, and if I don't, anyone can feel free to correct me. We began looking at this budget and moved forward to the Board of Finance with a request to consider a non-lapsing account April 30th. Sorry, I know you probably can't hear me, so I'll move closer. April 30th, so maybe Rich and Dr. Adley, if you could speak to the look that you've taken since April at this budget. Just, again, my goal here is that the information is on the table, and then we can decide where we end up. But I think some of the information, to best understand it, is going to be important so your members can make an informed vote tonight.
Well, just one point, and then I definitely want to hear your answer to that question. Let's say that the $880,000 that you're forecasting for a Board of Education surplus. So that amount of money, there was, as I said at the Board of Finance meeting, the decision was, do we put that into a non-lapsing account, or do we let it go to fund balance, right? In a sense, the money is not going anywhere. It's still there, whether it's in a non-lapsing account or it's in fund balance. In any case, the procedures would have been that you would come to the Board of Finance and say, we would like the money in the non-lapsing account released for whatever purposes we've identified, in which case we'd have a discussion and the money would be released. By having it in fund balance, the only difference is that we'd still have that discussion, but it would go to an appropriation vote with the RTM, which we felt was important to include them in those kinds of processes. But the money's still there, right? So the $880,000, more than the amount of this cut, by the way, that surplus is still there. And again, if you go through this review, and it's very clear after that the resources that are being provided in this budget are not sufficient, again, we can go back to fund balance, now $5,880,000, assuming the surplus is there, have a discussion about that. That amount can be appropriated to cover any deficiency that you feel you can't cover.
So I'd like the administration just to take a moment, both for the Board of Finance's benefit and the public that may be watching, to explain the difference between the non-lapsing account and a return of surplus at the end of the year. Rich, do you want to handle that, or Alan,
That's fine.
whomever feels
That's fine. Hey there, go ahead.
most versed?
Sure. So the non-lapsing account is usually set up with a specified number of items. The Board of Ed would typically vote on those items as to what they would want to expense out of a non-lapsing account. And then the Board of Finance, as the fiscal authority, would have to approve whether or not those were sufficient items to be expensed out of a non-lapsing account. Typically, districts would only, the agreements usually between the Board of Finance and the district is that it would be a non-reoccurring expenditure that would come out of that account, since non-lapsing funds are by definition a non-reoccurring source of revenue. So you wouldn't want to necessarily fund a teacher out of it, or an administrator or a secretary or paraprofessional.
Capital expenditures,
Right.
that sort of thing.
So most districts use either equipment, like whether it's technology equipment or maintenance equipment, small capital. So items like the carpet that you referenced would be items that would come from a non-lapsing account. Typically, it's approved as that list, and then once that list is approved by both the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance, the invoices are usually submitted to the town to make payment and draw against that non-lapsing account. And if we assumed it was $880, and at the end of the day it ended up being about $800, some things were a little bit less, that non-lapsing account would just be closed out and then go back to fund balance.
Yep.
So it wouldn't require individual.
Typically, no.
Yeah.
It could also be set up for a year. I mean, the Board of Finance obviously has control over it. it's an exceptional year if there ever was one. So it's not we're looking for control over it, it's just...
Right. Jim Palin, I think you had a couple things to say?
Yeah, thanks, John. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So I guess I just want to make sure we're kind of clear on a few things. I think, we're going to make our decision here in the next, half hour or so. And I think the next steps will be that message will then be passed along to the RTM, who will then debate and vote on that. And then ultimately, the Board of Ed, along with Dr. Adley, will need to go back and adjust their budget formally to make any of those changes. And I think what you're saying, John, is after they make those adjustments, if they start off the year and they find something unexpected, then they would come back to us, whether that be related to the budget or COVID or something here. But I think I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. The expectation is after we vote here, it goes to the RTM, they vote, and that becomes the budget. And I assume, as just listening to what the Board of Ed discussed on their meeting, and Tara, do jump in here, but what you discussed on your meeting on Tuesday night, after we make our decision and the RTM makes the decision, the 9 of you, working with Dr. Adley and the staff, will then go back and have to reallocate the budget to meet what's appropriated. What's currently being discussed is about a 2.5% increase. And after that, if there are questions or concerns or things come up, that's when obviously we'd expect you to reach out to John or us and go through the normal process.
So,
Go ahead, Dr. Adley.
I just say, this is my experience, okay? That process doesn't work in general, right? I can't talk for Darien, but that gets cumbersome. Sometimes it impacts the timeliness of what we can do and how we can do it, and it generally sets up a hurdle situation. I just would look to see if there's a way we could both mutually come to a meeting of the minds a little bit with it. Certainly I'm going to engage with the Board of Education. They would expect me to, and I would expect them to engage in a discourse around what we can do and cannot do. I just think it's an opportunity. I mean, even the 3:30 for the HVAC was an opportunity. We did defer, but it would be another opportunity to potentially take that as a consideration of a deferral. But we will go back.
Dr. Adley,
yes.
I guess just one question I have here. I mean, my understanding is, and I appreciate that you and Rich, have done a lot of work, and appreciate that you came back with, identified a bunch of sort of items that you've kind of rebudgeted and updated the amounts for. But the Board of Ed, the 9 elected members, need to kind of sit down with you and to sort of decide how they want to actually implement and change that budget. And that hasn't happened yet.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
So Jim, you bring up a great point, and I think it dovetails into Chairman Zagrodzky's point. So I'll go one by one. We absolutely need to. And when we do that as a group, and we have not done that, so I can't take a position on what any of those modifications might be yet. We also need to do that with the lens of our administrative professional who we brought to Darien to lead our school system. We may choose to agree or disagree with it, but we need to recognize that our superintendent will bring forward recommendations. And currently, the superintendent he thinks that this will materially affect education, which I think goes to Chairman Zagrodzky's point about what can the reasonable person think about what's being said as a 0.5% cut to the budget. And I think that's where we're seeing, we all spend so much time with these budgets. What does Joe Public think about this? And to understand that, I think, again, Dr. Adley and Rich, if you could speak a little bit to that point, the idea that this is just 0.5% change on the budget.
Well, I guess, Tara, and that one, that's not the question that I brought up, and I just want to make sure I'm clear for everybody that's listening. I think what you're hearing this board say is, in these tough times that John sort of outlined, we've gone through and made a whole series of decisions and analysis and considerations here on both budgets. Okay, and I think what we're considering is that we believe, or certainly I believe, that the Board of Ed will be able to plan a budget next year and deliver another year of great education with 0.5% of a reduction. I think the next step is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Board of Ed has not had any formal discussions about any single line item, what they may or may not change, and even the 468. All of those things that have been identified, the next step would be, after approved by the RTM, that the Board of Ed, the 9 elected members, go back, sit down, and actually go through the 3-inch binder that's sitting next to me.
Sure, Jim, I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question, but I think that then leads us into how and why you thought that was possible, because the board hasn't opined on that. And so all we have then, and Chairman Zagrodzky, you'd have to help here, all we have then is that list that was put forward to say that this is maybe reasonable to assume because we've looked at this list and we as a Board of Finance think it's reasonable. And so maybe Dr. Adley, and Rich, it's time to speak to that.
Well, Tara, I would just clarify something that Chairman Zagrodzky said. What this board has looked at is the 3-inch binder next to me, the countless meetings and everything and materials that Dr. Adley, his staff, have all put together, the discussions they've all had and so forth. So let's not focus on a handful of line items. This board went through a great deal of work and review, working with you, the staff and all the materials that you guys put together to kind of follow this budget for 4 months.
So that's great. Then let's just hear from Dr.
Can
Adley and
Board of
Rich.
Education members speak to Ms. Achman's comments, or do you want to wait until the end? Or Chairman Zagrodzky, I should ask. It's John Cini.
Let's let Dr. Adley talk, and
I'll
then
just close.
I'll get to the other members.
I'll just close out. Okay. I'll say for this budget, I don't budget. Rich and I haven't budgeted. The central services have not budgeted any cushion in this budget. So if people were to point out stuff, I would certainly be happy to engage in that discussion about where flexibility is or is not. So the budget isn't built in under that structure or framework. So I can't sit here and say that I can find that particular amount. Certainly at some point you find it with costs associated with it. So it is going to impact, as communicated to the Board of Finance, it will impact from my recommendation to the board. Now, in fairness, right, what Mr. Payne has said and what I've said earlier and what Tara has said, the board has yet to sit down and go through that in detail. If priorities change or values change or things that were held dear in the development of the budget change in some way, then obviously I would engage with them in that process, and that would be a dialogue back and forth, and the board would have to come to consensus on how it might deal with the issues. But when I go back to the board, I'll be starting. I honestly, right now, I have nothing to change right now until we get back into the discussion with the board regarding this matter in terms of how they feel about certain line items, certain priorities, risk factors. So for instance, like turnovers and budget control, I would not recommend changing those, but that's the superintendent, right?
I want to hear from Mr. Cini first, but maybe Ms. Achman, you, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, it's actually a serious question. So how can you help me script the answer to the taxpayer that says the reason the Board of Finance could not cut 0.5% from the Board of Education's budget to try and elicit this sort of post-pandemic review to see if further changes in the way you do business could be accomplished. The reason that we couldn't do that, again, looking at these business owners and taxpayers, the reason we couldn't do that is what?
Mr. Zagrodzky, that's not my role.
I know
guys
that,
will make your taxation decision, and we will honor it.
No, I totally get that, but the purpose of this workshop was to actually try to dissuade us from that. Okay, so that's why we're having this discussion. You guys don't want us to do that.
No.
So my question is, if we acquiesce to that demand and say, okay, terrific, we're not going to cut this, what do I tell those folks? And how do I explain that decision in a way that would make sense to them?
So I think I have taken the Board of Finance at its word and continue to, that you will make the best decision based on the financial health of Darien as you go forward. And I think that your vote will do that. I believe in all of your members to do that. And so I can't script that for you any more than you could script my words on Board of Education. And I wasn't elected to script yours and you weren't elected to script mine. So,
and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, and similar here, you have your expertise. I will respect the decision you make. The board will do the work it needs to do the reason I believe, and when we spoke on the phone for this meeting and in talking to our board, and I can really only speak on the board position, not really my own personal, was we heard that there was a confidence that these cuts wouldn't materially affect education. Our superintendent felt different. And so the idea was to get those ideas on the table, and then the Board of Education, the 9 of us, will be charged with whatever decision you all make, and we will do that to the best of our ability. And I respect all 9 of my members may have different feelings about how exactly to get there, and we'll take the advice of our administration to do that. So your words will be your own. I will respect this board's vote, and I think that's probably the best place to leave that.
Okay. Did others want to speak?
Yeah, it's John Cini. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to talk about, yeah.
Thank you. This afternoon, as a few of us were trying to figure out how best to address this work session, and thank you for having it to the Board of Finance. Mrs. Ackman said the Board of Education has taken no other position than our original budget. And I want to make that clear, and I think you guys have touched upon that. We haven't really opened up the budget back up since February, and we deeply appreciate the work that our administration has done to unearth potential other areas of cuts, but we haven't looked back at what we passed in February. And again, just to reiterate, we passed that budget unanimously before COVID was a glimpse in anybody's eye, and the disastrous effects that it's had on a health crisis basis and also on the economy. So you are, as a Board of Finance, looking at a top-down level, but frankly, since February, we haven't had a bottoms-up level at our budget. And again, it's not to erode what our administration has done, since then, and what we have tasked them to do to look at other areas of cuts, and they did a brilliant job of finding efficiencies that we never discussed through the original budget process. So I just wanted to make that point very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments from anyone else? Or questions, either from Board of Education or from Board of Finance?
Could I ask a question?
Francis, go.
This is Frank Puck. Hi. I'd be interested in whether there isn't kind of an educational loss here. If I worry that the Darien students are a little insulated from the world around them a little bit, and whether there isn't some educational loss in not sharing in the experience of their generation, where it's going to be belt-tightening around the country in schools, and whether somehow we're doing the right thing educationally and not having the Darien students share that experience.
Can I add something? It's Taylor.
Did you guys want to respond to Frank's question, or?
I need to reiterate what his question was there.
His question was whether there's educational value in having the school system take a loss like this and have that message to the kids that says, look, we're not destroying your education, but there's some belt tightening like everyone else and many families are having to undertake in town, and whether there's value in that as a general matter.
I think our kids are taking a lesson away already, and
they're certainly bored.
If we're asking kindergartners to learn that lesson, I don't know. I understand, Francis, the question concerned there, but in this case, we're the adults and trying to provide the kids with the educational experience. If I might just double up with just go back to your question, John, just a wee bit. Look, yes, you can get down to that level, but it is going to be with some pain. You just can't have it both ways. You cannot cut it at that level and pretend that it's not going, or try to understand that it's not going to be impactful. So in terms of taxpayers and stuff, I'd be respectful, and that's your charge. But we will get to wherever we have to get to. But it just means that I don't think you would to the taxpayers. I think you would try and find a mutual way to get there. I think that's our collective responsibility to do that.
So I would just say, from parents, I've heard, Frank, to your question, our kids are experiencing a sense of loss, whether that be graduation, senior year, spring sports, maybe we have a fall season, maybe we don't. I don't know that that's the question before us today. As I understand it, the question put forward from the Board of Finance was about the financial health and well-being of the town. But anecdotally, I think that the board always puts students and the taxpayers kind of at the forefront of their mind, and student loss is currently real.
Mr. Zagrowski, may I have a quick word? This is Michael Burke.
Michael, go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the meeting and all of your good work. I think what I'm just trying to make sure gets put out in a factual and a correct way is that however you want to characterize the cut as a small percentage of a whole or something that is a easy belt tightening, I believe what our superintendent is saying that if in your professional judgment we need to make this kind of a cut or additional cut, then we'll consider it and we'll do what we need to do. But if it's being proposed under the apprehension that it's not really going to affect services, and this is what I want to hear from our superintendent, is that it will, if that is actually the case, so everybody can be looking at this from the same perspective, because we're talking about the educational environment for 4,700 students, and we'll do what we have to do. But if the leader of our organization, of this district, is telling us that it's going to result in programmatic differences that are going to be very noticeable, I think that's important information that we all have. And ultimately, we'll do what we have to do, and we'll live, by what the Board of Finance dictates. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Other comments, questions?
It's Duke.
Duke?
Thank you, everyone. As always, I think very good dialogue, and I think both sides have kind of put on the table thoughts, processes, and where we stand. I do think, to a couple of points that were made, you'll make your vote tonight, and we'll work with that. And the Board of Ed has work to do when we go back, and I think Dr. Adley and Rich have done a lot of work. But I think we do have to step back every now and then, and again, think in the big picture. I think it was a good comment about the students and what they understand. They are, I think, hurting with graduation and stuff like that. But we have work to do, and I think it's important work. I think the work makes sense, and I'm hearing a commitment from the Board of Finance, and it may or may not be a challenge to work through that process, and I think we'll learn through that if we need to come to you for money. But I think we kind of, I personally understand kind of the charge and where we need to head. So we've got work to do around the thoughts that Dr. Adley and the administration have come up with.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions from anyone for the Board of Education budget?
I think I'd just like.
Can I just say something?
Taylor, please.
Sorry, who's it? All right, it's Taylor. Yeah, hi. Thank you all for your comments, and Frank, I'm sorry I interrupted. I really liked what you said. As you have faith in our board, I also have faith in yours. I truly believe you will find a way to do this in the least damaging way to the student population. I believe it can be done with really no impact. And I just want to clarify a point I made last time, and I think, John, you've done a good job of making it tonight, but I'll just do it one more time for everyone in the general public that might be listening. I don't think any of us are saying that we are unwilling to spend more money on education next year. Absolutely not. I think there could be, very likely will be, very large unexpected expenses related to a post-COVID transition back to school. Personally, I am unwilling to grant all requests that were made in this budget prior to the COVID disaster hitting. On behalf of taxpayers, I think we do need to have belt tightening, and I would like to see that budget cut.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, the Board of Education makes one appropriation request to the Board of Finance.
For
There's
what?
not, you said you were not unwilling to grant certain requests. We make an appropriation request, and I think Mr. Burke said it well, that we will honor whatever the decision is of the Board of Finance. I mean, I think the only thing I would like to just put on the table, because I think this is the work to what Mr. Sini was saying, that we as 9 of us will have to go back and do. I would like, the administration is telling us the cuts will materially affect education, although I have faith that they will try to minimize that. The Board of Finance is telling us that they don't want that to occur, but they feel that this is, I don't want to preclude your decision at the end, but they feel like something of what's been forward will not. And so I just need your 2 groups to understand your position so that when we go back and make our decisions, it's understood.
So I would characterize our point of view, not to speak for my whole board, a little differently, which is, I agree with how you're characterizing it and how Dr. Adley says. What we're doing is saying, we'd like to put this cut in place now. We would challenge you to see if you can do this without impacting students. If after that effort, which we would recommend spending some real time on, if after that effort, which we can then represent to the taxpayers as having been a serious effort, separate from when the budget was developed in a sort of pre-pandemic time, we can represent to the taxpayers that in fact that effort was done, and if you conclude at the end of that that no cut can be made, like we've suggested, that won't impact student experiences, we'll convene a discussion, we'll have an appropriation vote, and we'll replace that funding. Right? There is funding to do that. We're just saying, could you please undertake that exercise, and if it absolutely cannot work, come back to us. That's it.
All right, so I just think that the best way then to wrap it up is, Dr. Adley, do you want to talk about the seriousness of the efforts you've made so far?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committees and people who are watching, this isn't just like, I gave notice of this, so these are the things that I will be bringing forward. And I will entertain with the Board of Education should they have different priorities or change, but just because we keep saying it has no impact doesn't make it so. It does, and operationally it does, and practically it does. Programmatically it's going to. Now again, the board will visit some priorities in here. It's not my place to tell the Board of Finance what to do, but in the same way as you're requesting of us, I would say, look, could you relook at that capital non-lapsing account? I mean, I just, as a mutual meeting of the minds of trying to solve a problem collaboratively together, it just seems to make all the sense in the world to me. I'm actually confused. I understand what you said the other night, Mr. Chairman, and I respect that, but it just seems to be something that would make sense and would mutually accomplish the goals that we have together. But again, I will be bringing forward the recommendations that I have. I'll certainly review them again, but we've spent an inordinate amount of time on that, and the board will engage in the discussion of if they see it the same, or even if the board feels that what once was a priority for them is no longer a priority. Right? Perhaps that's the case too. In these challenging times, that can happen, and probably should happen in some areas. So.
Good, understood. Other comments, questions from anyone?
Yes, Sean, I'd like to address the non-lapsing account. The way you phrased it, there will be absolutely no difference between a non-lapsing account and the Board of Education coming back to the Board of Finance for an appropriation. I have worked in 2 districts. One had a non-lapsing account, one didn't. And the one which had a non-lapsing account, it was restricted to capital. Normally, an MOU is executed between the Board of Finance and Board of Education, and the Board of Education requests money be placed in the non-lapsing account. Then when they want the money, they have to come to the Board of Finance and request a set figure to be withdrawn from that account. I see no difference between a non-lapsing account and what you are asking the Board of Education to do now.
Okay.
We have a respectful disagreement on that, but that's understood.
Okay.
Well, hey, John, it's Jim here. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody, and I look forward to, I know that the Board of Ed has a sort of big job ahead. I know I will be watching their deliberations as they move forward and react to this and have to make, budget adjustments, and we'll make sure, we'll commit to kind of follow that very closely.
Okay, thank you, Jim. If there's no other questions for the Board of Education, I'm sorry, someone else?
This is Jill McCammon, if I could comment, please.
Jill, please, go.
Firstly, I thank you. I value the opportunity to review our priorities, as Ellen said, and take a look at our budget before we finish this process. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Secondly, I think there are two parts of this conversation. The first part is making budget cuts going into this process, and the second is preparing for what could come down the pike. And I know that it was referred to last meeting, but I think it's important to mention again that the Board of Finance is fully aware that we may see fluctuations in funding in budgetary needs for special education, for how we need to run our facilities, for cleaning and operations, that we may have lost revenue, all of these, that we may have enrollment fluctuations, if we have an influx from NYC or the private schools due to the economic downturn. All of these things have been mentioned. I just think it would be valuable for the public to hear reiterated that the Board of Finance is aware of that and are prepared to react flexibly should the Board of Education encounter needs in any of those areas.
Duly noted, and I can confirm that from my end. So thank you for stating that. Other input or anyone else want to speak on behalf of the Board of Education or about the budget? Okay. Thank you very much for having requested this session. I appreciate you all coming here, and this is great. Thank you. Okay, so I think Jennifer's going to switch over our microphones and coverage to the Board of Selectmen. Mrs. Stevenson is here with me in room 206. So I did want to give her a chance to speak or address the Board of Finance on any aspect of her budget that she'd like us to consider. So Mrs. Stevenson's coming up here now. And thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me in our new and unusual virtual world.
It is definitely new and unusual, and hopefully not long-lasting.
Yes, I agree. I have a couple just very short prepared remarks, if that's okay.
Please.
So good evening, Chairman Zagrodzky, and our virtual Board of Finance members and Board of Education members, and my colleagues from the Board of Selectmen, whom I know are already on the phone as well. Thank you so much for your diligent efforts. I know this one isn't easy, but our residential and commercial taxpayers are very grateful for your thoughtful work. Darienne's always benefited greatly from the conservative fiscal policy to get us through difficult times. This one likely being the most challenging of our lifetime, and it's a little bit unusual to say it that way, but I believe that to be true. We've been asked to make hard decisions, but the Board of Selectmen knows and respects that these are the right decisions in an uncertain time. I'd also like to express my sincere appreciation on behalf of my board to our town department heads for coming to the table when asked with programs and items to defer in an effort to relieve our taxpayers of the burden of higher taxes. Each week, including this morning, I meet virtually with my WestCog colleagues. I want to assure you that we are all facing the same goal of significantly reducing budgets to provide relief to our taxpayers. Most WestCog towns, including several in our DIRG, are attempting to manage to a flat mill rate. Some are working to reduce over their last year's budget. There's unanimous concern among my colleagues that next year's budget may be even more difficult than this one. I share this so that you know that Darien is not an outlier in these budget cutting efforts. I'm sure you recall that the Board of Selectmen's original proposed budget was already a modest reduction over last year's budget. In response to the COVID-19 crisis, the Board of Finance, as you mentioned, John, gave us a mandate to meet two different budget reduction scenarios, a flat mill rate and a flat tax levy, proportioned as you saw fit between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. The Board of Selectmen met both scenarios and, in fact, exceeded your mandates, which gives you the flexibility this evening as you deliberate final deferrals and set the new mill rate. We understand and respect that you will likely defer the funding for finalizing our now 10 years in the planning civilian dispatch, as it seems clear from your deliberations that adding FTEs in the current environment is not defensible. While the Board of Selectmen is in fact split on our continued support for funding the dispatchers in this budget, we are unanimous in our support for the plan in general and the flexibility it gives Chief Anderson and his leadership team to more efficiently and effectively deploy sworn officers for the myriad of duties required of them. Until the COVID-19 crisis is over and Governor Lamont's social and business restrictions are lifted, it is in fact our police officers who are on the front lines tasked with enforcing the now 41 executive orders. As we begin to reopen on May 20th, we may face unknown challenges with order enforcement. I respectfully ask that you extend to the Board of Selectmen and the Darien Police Department, as you have to the Darien Library and the Board of Education, the ability to come back to you mid-budget cycle to seek appropriations for critical, unmet law enforcement and other needs. I'm here to help. Thanks again for your thoughtful process and including us in your conversations.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Does anyone else from the Board of Selectmen have any comments, or any members of the Board of Finance have any comments or questions for Mrs. Stevenson? Okay. Hearing none, I appreciate you coming by and thank you for your statement. So that concludes the budget workshop part of our deliberations this evening. I'm appreciative for everyone from both boards participating, as well as the superintendent and professional staff. Takes a lot of work to prepare for these and a lot of patience to sit through them. So thank you very much. So I think we can move on to the rest of our agenda. Next item up for discussion is the Board of Finance discussion about our proposed cuts to these budgets. We need to make some decisions on that and then vote on the budget and set the mill rate. Jennifer has sent around some budget resolutions that we will vote on once our discussions are complete, and then we will move on from there to other items. So let me open up the discussion to members of the Board of Finance. If you have any comments or questions, or would like to address specifically the cuts that are before us in terms of what we need to adopt for the budget. So I'm not going to do all the talking.
Well, John, it's Jim here, so I'm happy to open up here, and I'm not sure if there's, if we want to start on the Board of Ed side or the Board of Selectmen side, we go in order how we discussed it today.
Dealer's choice.
But I think maybe, if I could move discussion on the Board of Ed.
Go.
Operating budget. And I think, listen, I think it was, I appreciate Dr. Adley and Rich coming in, and certainly all the members of the Board of Ed have joined. I think it was helpful to kind of hear from them and so forth. And but I would say, my opinion is that I think the $557,000 of additional, the 0.5% of the reduction that we're looking for beyond what they identified, I think my decision hasn't changed versus what we all discussed, but as a board on Tuesday, and I still think I'm still in favor of the additional $557,000 cut that would bring effectively their operating expense budget up by 2.4% this year. So I'm good with that.
Okay.
Do others? I'd be happy to kind of move a motion if that's what you want the next step to be.
No, we'll need a motion, but let's actually hear from everybody in terms of their point of view on this. Frank, would you like to weigh in next?
Yes, I'm with Jim on this. I think we do need to recognize some of this financial pain that this town is incurring and will incur. And I think this is a great gesture on the part of the Board of Finance to try and rationalize this in a way that's not too harmful at all to the services in town, and yet achieves the flat tax levy.
Okay, thank you. Taylor?
Sure, yeah, I mean, thank you, Jim, for kicking it off. I would feel like I'd done something wrong if I wasn't crystal clear about my support for the Board of Ed coming back for an appropriation about their inability to cut this budget as it stands. I would not be in support of granting relief to that. I think it's doable and necessary. I am very open to them coming back for COVID-related expenses, however, so there's a very clear difference there that I want to make before we move on.
Okay, and your sense of the proposed cut that we have discussed?
I'm very comfortable with that number. I'm comfortable even higher if we needed to go there.
Okay. Paul?
I support Jim's position. I also support your openness in inviting the Board of Education back if necessary after doing their due diligence in this during this COVID-19 environment. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Dan?
I just wanted to also thank Ms. Ockman, Dr. Adley, and Mr. Rudel for their impassioned discussion of their budget. I think we all take great comfort in the stewardship that we have of our school system and an understandable approach to this budget discussion. However, I also take comfort in the fact that, as Jim articulated, and John, you did prior, what we're asking for is a 0.5% reduction in the budget, a $557,000 reduction on a $103 million plus budget. So I am too comfortable that the administration and the Board of Education will be able to find a way to make those adjustments, and if necessary, come back to us for further appropriation if necessary.
Okay. Rob?
Thanks, John. So I think this is my 8th budget, and I think this is probably, for lack of a better word, maybe the bumpiest of all the ones that we've done. I'm in total agreement with Taylor said. A, and B, I am very comfortable with the cuts that we've put in place at this point.
Okay. I guess my only comment is that I recognize the difficult situation that everybody is in, and I mean everybody. I'll reiterate my sincere hope from the meeting the other night that however this all turns out, that no one's more than modestly mad. So I stick by that hope and perhaps fleeting aspiration. My own sense is that the reasons I laid out before about the nature of this cut and the percentage of it, it strikes me that if I were to actually turn the tables and say, if I could cut $557,000 from a budget of this size, how could I do that in such a way that creates damage to the program? And just in pondering this as we listen to it tonight, I struggle with that. I'm not sure how I would cut a $104 million budget by just that amount and do it in a way that is deeply damaging. And so at the same time, I want to acknowledge what Dr. Adley said. He was sincere in his comments about the budget. He was sincere about what he'd prepared even before this whole process started as something that was lean, something where he'd already taken out FTEs. I've actually had multiple conversations with him well prior to this that convinced me that he has done exactly what he said. He has in fact produced a lean budget. At the same time, I really do feel that a more formal and longer process and effort to try and address the challenge that we've laid out, which is that for this small percentage cut, can we take one more look? And can you take one more turn at the crank at this budget and really, really check to make sure that there is not room to just take out this one last 0.5%. Again, I think that as an overall matter, these reductions combined with the Board of Selectmen do get us to our stretch target aspiration of a flat tax levy. It is not inconsistent, based on what Mrs. Stevenson said, with what other towns are attempting to do. And it is certainly not inconsistent with the amount of economic pain that we felt to date, which by every indication could get worse over time. So I would have to concur with my colleagues that this cut is not unreasonable. We look forward to the Board of Education working through this with the administration and the superintendent. And we also look forward to them, if needed, coming back to us with an appropriation. And I would echo that the same applies, as Mrs. Stevenson said, to the Board of Selectmen. If there's something we've missed, or frankly something new that's related to COVID-19 or anything else, particularly our police and first responders, again, this board will convene immediately to consider those appropriation requests. This is not about cutting services, damaging town assets, or materially affecting the experience of students. This is about making a very, very hard attempt to see, can we cut and preserve those services? And if we can't, and the answer is an honest no, we're going to address it. So I'm fine with that. Let me move on to the Board of Selectmen budget, as well as some of the other numbers we've had here for other revenues, contingency and all that. Everyone heard from Mrs. Stevenson. Do you have any questions about that or any further reactions? Just as a review, there's a few cuts here. One of them is $427,000 in operating expenses that we identified with the Board of Selectmen and the discussion that we had the other day. We also had, in terms of capital expenditures, $745,000, which includes the $500,000 reduction in the fire apparatus equipment reserve, for a total of $1,173,530. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to make on the Board of Selectmen budget?
This is Dan. I would echo what was said earlier regarding the department heads and how thorough the Board of Selectmen and the town was in re-examining their budget. And given that thoroughness and the much appreciated comments from Ms. Stevenson this evening, I remain comfortable with that number.
Okay. All right, other comments or questions?
John,
Go.
Yeah, John, it's Jim Palin here. I would say I'm also comfortable with kind of what we're proposing on the Board of Selectmen's operating budget, and maybe just for those listening and or watching, what I would say is like the cuts that they identified, including the delay on the civilian dispatchers, would bring their operating budget to a 1.2% decrease versus what they originally proposed, and just as a comparison to what we're deciding here on the Board of Ed, that was a 1% decrease to their operating budget.
Right.
So it's a little bit more, but generally in the same vicinity.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions on any aspect of any budget before we get to our budget resolution?
If we're all going through the Board of Selectmen, I just want to, thank the Board of Selectmen for their effort. They really went above and beyond. My only reservation was about civilian dispatch coming out. But I understand the headcount addition and I support the desire to kind of hold back on that if we can. I think my concern is in, a new economic environment that if we, that we could see potentially increased crime rates, and I would consider that somewhat COVID related, just like COVID-related expenses we may see on the Board of Selectmen or Board of Education side. And, if there is an acute need to do this mid-cycle, I would encourage you all to come back and talk to us about that when it happens.
Okay, other questions or comments? Okay. All right, I've got an updated budget resolution, which would be the next part of what we need to approve. So I will read this resolution, and we'll need a motion to approve this. And Jennifer's got this updated with the numbers that we need. Section A, resolved that an appropriation of $2,291,845 is hereby made from the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures for the purpose of meeting expenses of the town of Darien, as shown by the budget this day approved. B, resolved that an appropriation of $45,365,691 is hereby made in the general fund for the Selectmen's operating budget. C, resolved that an appropriation of $102,496,378 is hereby made for the general fund for the education operating budget. Resolved that the above appropriations totaling $147,862,069 are for the purpose of meeting the expenses of the town of Darien for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2020 and ending June 30th, 2021, as shown by the budget on this day approved. E, resolved that a tax of 16.36 mils is hereby levied upon the last complete grand list of the town with a total net assessment of $8,568,308,532 on property as of October 1st, 2019, payable in 2 equal semi-annual installments. The first installment to become due and payable on July 1st, 2020, and the second installment to become due and payable on July 1st, 2021, provided, however, that 1, any taxpayer may pay both of said installments on July 1st, 2020. B, the personal property, or 2, the personal property tax on motor vehicles in said town shall become due and payable in 1 single installment on July 1st, 2020. 3, any property tax in the amount not in excess of $100 shall become due and payable in 1 single installment on July 1st, 2020. F, resolved that the town of Darien, acting through its Board of Selectmen, is subject to the approval of said town at the annual budget meeting of the representative town meeting to be held on June 8th, 2020, be authorized to borrow on the note or notes of the town the sum of $10 million or so much therefrom as may be necessary for the general expenses of the town pending the collection of either or both of said semi-annual installment of taxes on or prior to June 30th, 2021. And finally, G, resolved that the following appropriations for other funds are hereby made as detailed below for the 2020-2021 fiscal year shown by the budget this day approved. $4,009,013 for the sewer operating fund for the purpose of meeting the expenses of the town of Darien Sewer Commission, $550,000 sewer assessment fund, $99,500 sewer capital fund, $1,097,620 for the parking lot administration fund, and $400,000 for the parking lot capital fund. That's the complete resolution. Could I have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Dan, second?
Second.
Okay, Rob? All in favor? Okay.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Anyone
In favor
opposed?
too.
Anyone opposed? Okay, resolution passes. Thank you. All right, so now we move on to a refunding resolution, which I hope I have here handy. Hold on. Jennifer, are you on the line? You want to tell us the details on the refunding resolution?
Certainly. So this is our usual, we do this every year so that we have the flexibility to refund as opportunities arise. And this resolution does incorporate the changes that we had to go back to the RTM for in the fall when we did the early redemption. So this does include allowing us to use unassigned fund balance to finance such appropriation. And it does also include language that would allow us to issue taxable bonds if that were an appropriate situation.
Okay, so just to be clear, this is for the $30 million in refunding, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, so this is a resolution appropriating $30 million to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorizing the issuance of refunding bonds or amounts available in unassigned fund balance to finance such appropriations. I won't read through all that, but it's, as Jennifer said, it's the usual resolution we have at this time of year to help us respond quickly to refunding opportunities. Could I have a motion to approve the refunding resolution for $30 million? Jim?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Rob? Okay, all in favor?
I'm in favor too.
Okay,
Aye.
all right, anyone opposed?
Aye.
Okay, hearing none, motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Okay. Next up is a special appropriation related to Board of Finance fiscal 2021 budget adjustment for the bond premium to debt service fund. So this is $216,756. As Jim has explained before, this is the use of bond premium for the purpose of debt service. Jim, would you like to just review that, what we did there, and make sure everyone's clear on that?
Yes, and just as a reminder, about a month ago or so, we opportunistically issued approximately $21 million worth of bonds to finance the upcoming Oxford elementary school construction, and those bonds were issued at approximately a $4 million premium. So we're using a small portion of that premium, $216,000, to pay the first interest payment that's due on those bonds, which I believe, Jen, is in November, out of the actual bond
Actually, I think our
premium
first interest is in August.
Okay. So we're using 216 of those proceeds that we raised, namely the bond premium proceeds, to pay that first interest payment, which falls the next fiscal year. And I guess, Jen, just a question here. Will this go on? This will go on to the RTM as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, any other questions on this? It's a special appropriation for us to move this, to pay this bond interest from the bond premium. Any other questions? Okay, motion to approve the special appropriation in the amount of $216,756.
So moved.
Rob, second.
Second.
Dan. Okay, all in favor? Okay, anyone opposed?
Yeah, me?
Okay, terrific, passes unanimously. Okay, next up is a transfer related to the Board of Finance, fiscal 2021 budget adjustment. So Department of Public Works paving for $400,000. So as the description here reads, the Board of Finance identified a contribution from the Reserve for Capital Non-Recurring Expenditure Reserve, Board of Finance Reserve as a fiscal 2021 budget adjustment. In order to make this adjustment, the paving budget in fiscal 21 is reduced by $400,000, with the balance of the requested budget being funded from this transfer. So just as a reminder, one of the things we elected to do as part of our original special meeting discussion on April 23rd was to use $400,000 from the Board of Finance Reserve to help cover some of these capital expenditures, and this transfer actually accomplishes that. So again, as we discussed, I don't think it's controversial, but any questions or comments on that? Okay, motion to approve? Okay, Rob, second. Jim, all in favor? Okay, very good. Anyone opposed?
Me too.
Okay, that motion passes. Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of bond appropriation, bond authorizations to do. The first one for Holmes Elementary School HVAC design, $302,000. So I thought this was going to be deferred. So Jennifer, are we not discussing that, or what am I missing here?
Right, this was put on, the agenda was put together before we knew for a fact that the Board of Ed was going to request to defer this, so we do not have to take any action on it.
Okay, so no action on that resolution. The second resolution is sidewalk repair and replacement for $503,000. This is for authorizing the issuances of bonds to cover that expenditure. So as you recall, these are in the category of things that were part of the operating budget but that we've elected to put up for bonding, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the first one, sidewalk replacement, $503,000. Any questions on that particular appropriation and bonding? Okay, motion to approve? Jim, second? Dan, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Me too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next one, this is for various capital improvement projects. This totals $865,000. I've got a resolution in here. This one says $1,015,000. Which one's right, Jennifer?
Right, the resolution that you have for $1,015,000 is correct because it was originally prepared by bond counsel before we had committed to bonding the $75,000 for gym upgrades and the $75,000 for new sidewalks. So those have been added here in the description, and the total has been increased by $150,000.
Okay, great. So that covers the two that we had pulled out of the Board of Selectmen budget. Okay, great. All right, so now we have a resolution for $1,015,000 to cover all these different capital projects, from town hall heating controls to the gas conversion at the Northern Fire Department, and of course the tennis court construction at the high school. Any questions on this particular appropriation for bonding? Motion to approve? Okay, Rob, second. Jim, all in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Me
Great.
too.
Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, so that's all of the bond appropriation and authorizations. We do need to do a reappointment of Blum Shapiro as an auditor for fiscal year 2020. Anybody have, from the audit committee, want to comment on that? We've had a few discussions about reappointing them, but I wanted to make sure there were no other comments to be made on that. Anybody have anything?
Yeah, Jen could probably help me out because I think we sent out, I think we got back 2 RFPs, if that, or maybe just only Bloom. Is that
Only Bloom.
only Bloom? So they almost kind of won by default.
But I would say too that when we only received the one response, I did reach out to Rob was our audit committee representative for the RFP. I reached out to him, and I did reach out to Rich Rudel at the Board of Ed just to make sure that they were comfortable, or to ask, do we want to go back out and try to get more responses? And everyone was very comfortable with continuing with Blum Shapiro.
Okay.
Okay. And Jen, I know, it sounds like we're sticking with the same one, but I think just for everybody's benefit, I think we did switch lead partners, didn't we? Like a year ago or 2 years ago?
We switched partners 2 years ago, and one of the requirements for them for the new engagement was another partner change. So we will have a different partner for the next 3 years with them.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I think a partner change provides the refresh and renewal that you need in these relationships, but gives us the advantage of having a firm that knows us well continue to work with us. And I've talked to Jennifer about this. She remains, not to put words in her mouth, I think extremely satisfied with the work that they do. So hopefully, at least in my mind, a partner change like this is sufficient to constitute renewal and having a fresh pair of eyes look at our audit function. So other questions? All right, motion to approve the reappointment of Blum Shapiro as our auditor for the fiscal year 2020. Okay, Paul, second. Rob? Okay, all in favor? Okay, anyone opposed?
Yeah, me too.
Okay, great, 7-0, thank you. All right, we've got a couple transfers to go through. So the first one is for $68,992, and this pertains to some salary transfers and accrued leave redemption. And this is the result of the retirement of the police chief. Jennifer, do you have anything to say about this or to add?
I just wanted to explain why we're taking it from full-time salary. The accrued leave payouts were associated with the retiring chief, as well as a payout of compensatory time for the new chief. And as a result of all the shifting of positions and movement and whatnot resulting from the appointment of a new chief from within, we have additional dollars in the full-time salaries account within the police department. So we would like to use that to offset the deficit in accrued leave.
Okay. I'm okay
Jen,
with that.
can you just explain what the accrued compensatory time is?
So sworn police officers, as well as I believe at the captain level, they are able to accrue compensatory time rather than being paid overtime. It's in their union contract up to what number of hours they can accrue, and it carries over from year to year. And it is payable, the balance is payable when they separate from service. Or in this case, the chief was not allowed to continue carrying compensatory time when he was promoted to the chief.
Okay, I'm okay with this. Any other questions or comments? Motion to approve? Jim?
I just want
Frank, go ahead.
I just want to note that the number is very similar to the Ron Gray number. That's all I want to say.
Duly noted. All right, I will consider that a second from you, if that's all right. All in favor? Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Okay, great. Transfer passes. Second of two transfers. This one is for $135,950. This is about, reducing the amount of vacation that non-represented employees can carry over. Jennifer, can you quickly go through this?
Yes, and when we put together the fiscal 20 budget, Kate and I had included funds to buy down employees' vacation accruals so that they can carry over less from year to year. Right now, the max that someone can carry over is 10. We want to bring everybody down to 5. During the budget last year, the Board of Selectmen said they would not like to include that in a budget item and tax for it to buy these down, but in the current year, our union contract settled better than anticipated, and we do have funds available in the employee salary increase line. So Kate went to the Board of Selectmen last week about the policy change to change the rate of carryover. They agreed to the policy change, and they approved this buy down to get everyone down to 5 weeks at the end of the current fiscal year.
Okay. Questions for Jennifer on this transfer? I'm okay with this. Any a motion to approve? Dan, second. Rob, okay. All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Me too.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's it for our transfers. Financial report, Jennifer.
What you have is as of April 30th, and despite COVID, our property tax collections are doing very well. We have had property tax coming in over the last couple of months, even though we've been closed. And we have received all of our expected intergovernmental aid in both the general fund and the reserve for capital non-recurring on the town side. So those are doing well. And the town clerk revenue, which is a significant revenue that would be impacted by any changes in the real estate volume of transactions as well as dollar amount, is on track to meet budget. They're tracking with how they did 2 years ago. So hopefully that will continue. On the expenditure side, I've tried to note for you where departments have been able to identify the impact of COVID, whether it be on a reduction in their revenues, a increase in their expenditures, or in some cases a decrease in their expenditures. We haven't had that much COVID expense. Our biggest areas have actually been in legal. We've incurred $45,000 in COVID-related legal expenses just through research and consultation on how we need to be doing something. But overall, excluding what we've done for human services, which has been mostly covered by donations, we've spent $68,420 on legal, and then mostly sanitizing supplies.
Okay.
If I can ask a question.
Go.
On that legal, that principally in relation to the executive orders coming from the governor or the powers that might arise?
That's a big part of it, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything that you're forecasting extreme short-term, say through the end of the fiscal year, that you see on the horizon or that's come up that you know about that's not yet apparent in these numbers that could be COVID-related?
No, nothing has popped out as being very extreme. We have our emergency management director is coordinating our submission for FEMA reimbursement. We have the potential to receive 75% of eligible expenses, which are very narrowly defined. In terms of overtime, they will only reimburse police overtime for those who were working at the testing site on overtime, so that's going to be very limited. The public health department has said that costs that they've incurred can be covered by existing grants. And the human services department has seen some pretty significant expenditures, but the majority of those have been covered by donations. Okay. Overall, I'm looking at a projection on the revenue and expenditure side. I think will be about $800,000 contribution back to fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay. That's good to hear. We'll need all those reserves in place going forward. So, any other questions on the financial report?
Yeah, one for me. Hey, Jen, the note that came out, apologies, late yesterday or early today on CARES Act, the CARES Act of $131,000, I think. When's the anticipated time that shows up? Like, how does that work? I know it's probably new to everybody. Looks like it's Fed funds.
And would it go directly to the Board of Education or just to the town?
We did receive another round of information today. Let me just pull it up. Give me 1 second. Because we were kind of having a discussion about that over here today. It does sound like it's probably going to go directly to school districts, just based on the wording of this notification from Governor Lamont. But I am not exactly sure of the timing or their exact distribution method.
When you find out, would you mind just maybe, if the board's interested, just sending it out? I'm just kind of curious in terms of timing and distribution and how they're doing it.
Absolutely, and I would even ask Paul if you know any more about what the plans are for this. Please jump in.
I don't know what the plans are. I'm aware of the amount that it's about 150, I believe. And it's part of the ESSF, part of the CARES Act, and it's specifically designated for education.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Jen on the financial report?
Just a question on are you going to go through the remaining pages in this report on capital, et cetera, or if I have a question on parking, is this the right time to ask it?
Sure, I didn't really have much to highlight on anything else, so if you have a question, go right ahead.
Yeah, just any sense for how much pay station revenue is going to be off because there's no one commuting?
Well, last month, I think we got about $200, which is significantly less than we normally get, and I expect that it'll continue to be low, so that pay station revenue, I don't think we're going to see much additional collected for the remainder of this year.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions about the financial?
I will say too that both the sewer fund and the parking fund do have very healthy fund balances. So if we do fall short on the parking fund revenue side, there is fund balance available.
Great. Other questions
Back
on
to that
that?
for a sec.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I know we haircut it. How much did we haircut that again? Because yeah, we're not going to get anything for May and June at this point. The city doesn't look like it's going to reopen for a while.
We did not make any changes in the parking fund from what was proposed.
Oh yeah, sorry.
And then there's only a very, very small piece that goes into the general fund.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. No other questions on the financial report. Let's move on to the minutes. Dan, you've had a chance to take a close look at these, correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So we have minutes for both April 14th, the special meeting, as well as April 23rd, another special meeting. I've glanced through these, and these look okay to me. Does anyone have any corrections, changes, edits, questions?
Isn't it the LoSIP grant, not the LOTSIP grant?
No, it's actually a LOTSIP grant. I had the same question. Jennifer, can you refresh us as to what that grant is?
Yes, this is a local transportation grant, not our usual local capital grant. So they are different.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We were all in participation for both of these discussions. Motion to approve the April 14th minutes. Okay, Rob, second. Jim, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me too.
All right, great. April 23rd minutes, motion to approve those. Okay, Dan, second. Rob, okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Any opposed?
Yep.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, that's approval of minutes. Special assignments committee reports. We've kind of already talked a little bit about audit tonight. Anything on the Oxbridge Building Committee from you, Dan?
Just that the staging of the construction looks like it has been modified to have less disruption on the school while it's in session. I think they're still kind of working through that. We had a good call earlier today, and I think the committee's generally satisfied with the work that's been done on that aspect of the project. So that's all I have for this evening.
Okay, terrific.
Dan, just a question, maybe you can follow up later, but in terms of the projected drawdown of funds, given that how they're going to reorganize the process a bit, has anything significantly changed there, just as we kind of think forward to when we have to maybe tap the market again?
I haven't seen anything from the building committee side. And there really hasn't been that much activity with respect to meetings. Jen may have a more current forecast on that.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What?
Jim, you want to repeat your question?
Yeah, Jen, just wondering if there's any if there's been any material change in, how quickly they think they're going to draw down those funds and/or when we might need to go to market again, just given.
Not that has been communicated to me. I think they are still refining their number and their budget as well as their overall plan.
Okay. In terms of the chairman's report, I guess all that I would say is to just briefly recap a couple of things. One, I wanted to thank both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, particularly Ms. Stevenson, Ms. Ockman, and Dr. Adley. I know these are not easy discussions. If it were simple to cut budgets, we would be cutting them all the time. But the reality is that it's extraordinarily difficult to cut budgets. It's painful to cut budgets. It's a departure from what we're used to. And yet we're in unprecedented times, and I'd like to thank both boards for the work that they did to get us to this point. Not easy, but it is very much appreciated. As I've said before, the role of the Board of Finance is not to micromanage spending or have anything to say about spending policy, but more what is the overall spending that's appropriate for the town. And given the current circumstances that we're in, we felt collectively that we needed to take action in this regard and to do all we can to try and, frankly, minimize these budgets. So again, I know this is not difficult. We stand by what we said before, which is as both boards work through these cuts, or as both boards face new expenditures related to COVID-19, which is very much uncertain at this point, not just for the town, but frankly for individuals here, that the Board of Finance stands with you, and we are ready to convene in a moment's notice to consider an appropriation to cover those expenditures. Even though we're tightening things up, this town is not broke by any means. We have the resources available and the taxpayer debt available to preserve town assets, town services, and the ability of the Board of Education to educate our students. So those things are not going to change. At the same time, as I said before, it is important, both as a general matter, but also with regard to our taxpayers, that everybody take a step back in this very new environment that is without precedent and take a close look at these budgets. I applaud the boards for doing that, and we look forward to working with you as we get through this difficult time. So I didn't have anything else from my report. Does anyone else have any comments or questions before we wrap things up? Okay.
Just a quick thing for me. I just want to thank everybody on this board for just really great, amazing work. You never stop learning in this job. It's a difficult last 6 to 8 weeks, but I just want to thank everybody for their cooperation and help.
Duly noted. I agree. I don't ever stop learning. I'd actually like to start sleeping. That's going to be on my agenda tonight, but certainly. But I would echo what Rob said. Great work from everybody. I called on a number of you at the last minute to get some things done, and literally everybody came through, so I appreciate that. Okay, I think we're done. Could I get a motion to adjourn? Okay, Rob, second. Paul, all in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, 6:50.